Twin soldiers and Nixon coming. We're finally on our...
In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected President of the United States on his promise to bring an end to the war in Vietnam. But by late April of 1970, the United States had invaded Cambodia and widened the Vietnam War. Protests began across college campuses throughout the United States. At Kent State University in Ohio on May 4, 1970, 28 guardsmen opened fire on a crowd of protesters, killing 4 students and wounding 9. Immediately, the school was closed, and once word was known, hundreds of schools all over the country shut down. Shortly after, the President's Commission on Campus Unrest stated the action of the guardsmen had been unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable. An investigation of 8 of the guardsmen took place, but the charges were dismissed for lack of evidence. The Kent State Massacre was devastating for many people in America.
Richard Nixon was elected for president in 1968 with his promise to end the Vietnam War. His plan was called Vietnamization, which consisted of U.S. troops gradually withdrawing from the war. However, on April 30th, 1970, Nixon instead stated on television that U.S. troops were to invade Cambodia. This publicly caused an uproar as already many U.S. troops were being killed. In May 1968, 562 U.S. troops were killed in 1 week alone. Many college students were worried about being drafted for the war, and this affected their reaction to Nixon's announcement.
On April 30th, 1970, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television to announce the invasion of Cambodia by the United States and the need to draft 150,000 more soldiers for the expansion of the Vietnam War effort. In response, several different campuses around the country began to protest, including Kent State.
Many protests began after Nixon announced the invasion of Cambodia. Activists from 20 different colleges met up at the University of Pennsylvania and planned to strike. ROTC centers were burned down at the University of Maryland, Hobart, Princeton, and Oregon State campuses. In Ohio, Governor James Rhodes, after finding the Kent State University ROTC building burnt down, he started planning and thinking about arrests.
The morning of May 4th, 1970 was what further led up to the event. That morning, the education building was closed at 7:45 due to bomb threats. Students all over campus got word of a rally being held at 11 a.m. Many students came to protest the presence of the National Guards, others were simply curious. The rally was not to be permitted, recalled 2 guard officers. General Canterbury reached the Commons between 11:30 and 11:40 a.m. At that time, Canterbury told a commission investigator he felt there was no threat.
At 11:45 a.m., the crowd had grown to more than 500 people. Guards were soon instructed to lock and load their weapons. Student activists began chanting, "Pigs off campus," and other slogans. Students began to ring the victory bell, and soon after, National Guards began spraying tear gas. When the tension was at a breaking point, the guardsmen had orders to open fire. 28 guardsmen reported shooting altogether 61 bullets at 12:25 p.m. 4 students were killed, 9 were wounded. The students killed were Jeffrey Mueller, Allison Cross, William Schroeder, and Sandra Schuer. The 9 students wounded were Joseph Lewis, Jr., Thomas Grace, John Clary, Alan Canafora, Dean Kaler, Douglas Rentmore, James Russell, Robert Stamps, and Donald McKenzie.
Here is a video of Dean Kaler, who was permanently paralyzed from the shootings.
My name is Dean Kaler. I'm a former student, a graduate of Kent State University. I was here on May the 4th, 1970. I was shot and wounded. I've seen the demonstrations on TV and in Life magazine and Time magazine and Newsweek magazine, and talked about it all through high school, and knew friends who were killed in Vietnam. And as a farm boy, you don't get the chance to go to protest because those cows have to be milked and taken care of, nurtured for 24 hours a day. And this was probably my only chance to get to an anti-war demonstration. All I saw was them turn with their deliberate motion, and I jumped on the ground myself at that point.
Well,
when I saw them turning, I knew they were shooting, and I was jumped on the ground, because there was no place to run to. There was no cover for me at that point. I knew I get shot because it felt like a bee sting on my back. And I knew immediately because my legs got real tight and then they relaxed. It's just like in zoology class when you pith a frog.
Right.
The damage that was done to my spinal cord was such that it caused that reaction. I could feel that. And I had just done that in zoology class 3 weeks prior to the shootings. The only thought that came into my head is if I'm turned over, will I bleed more internally than externally? And I thought, it's a 50-50 chance.
Right.
You're going to die one way or the other. I knew I might die. I had a really good chance of dying. And so I wanted to see this sky and the sun and the leaves and people's faces. I didn't want to be eating grass when I died. So history will hurt you if you don't learn about it. And it's important that you learn about it. And it's important that you don't forget about it so that you don't repeat it.
Students across the campus began protesting. After the shootings, Kent State was closed, and all around the country, protests began. All around the U.S., there were at least 100 student strikes a day. By May 10th, at least 450 schools had striked or were shut down.
On August 13, 1971, Attorney General John Mitchell announced that there would be no federal grand jury to investigate. He stated that the shootings lacked credible evidence and that there is no way to prove what guns were used. President Nixon sent him a memo through John Ehrlichman that said the president has decided that no such grand jury would be sought. Many still hoped for there to be a reopening of the case, as many agree with the statement by the President's Commission of the Campus Unrest that stated that the action of the guardsmen had been unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable.
The shootings at Kent State University were very violent. Both protesters and non-protesters ran frantically away from the array of firing bullets. Many stopped to help the injured as bullets still flew over their heads.
After the Kent State Massacre, there were several other protests. At Jackson State University on May 14, 1970, only 10 days after the Kent State Massacre, 2 students were killed when police force opened fire on a group of protesters who were also protesting the invasion of Cambodia. 12 other students were injured. These killings were never as publicized as the Kent State shootings. The Kent State Massacre impacted history by putting attention on the protest of the war, which eventually ended the war in Vietnam.